If I can use running to do that for somebody else, let's have at it.
You talked about not being able to like run and at one point not even being able to walk. Mentally and physically, how did you overcome that?
Not a pretty sight. um, yeah, when I was 18, so I went to college. Let me back up for a second. My family of origin fell apart in a very dramatic way when I was in high school. And it was quite awful, and for a variety of reasons. And I was running in high school, and had by the time I was a sophomore in high school was like ranked in New England as one of the top 5 distance runners in New England. But I really had grown to despise running. It had led me to a lot of anxiety and other issues. But we were incredibly poor, and when it was time for me to go to college, I didn't have a lot of options. What I had was I really could have and seriously considered staying home and going to a local community college and working with my mom cleaning houses because she still had 4 kids at home and we were living in poverty. And then I got a effectively a full scholarship plus a lot of Pell grants and loans and other all the other things to go to a small college in Connecticut. And they had a running, and one of the reasons was their running coach knew that I existed and invited me to be part of the team. They didn't have athletic scholarships, but my academics got me in, but that was going to be a connection. And I ran for a year, and then I quit. I quit in part for a variety of reasons, but one of them was that by the end of that year, I was in significant pain. And I had seen a doctor who had said, "You have serious problems with your spine. You're going to need back surgery, and you probably shouldn't run." And I was 18. So I effectively gave up running, other than just doing it for myself very sporadically for a handful of years. I took it up again, just again, very casually. Like I didn't race for another 5 or 6 or 7 years. And then I started to try doing some races when I was in my mid to late 20s when I was in graduate school. But by the time I had my son when I was 28, within a year of that time, I had gotten to the point where I could barely walk. I couldn't be home alone with him because I couldn't pick him up. I had nerve damage. The long story short, I had a whole lot of problems with my spine, discs, vertebrae, all of it, and I did end up having to have back surgery. And so your answer as to how we sort of solved how I've managed that. So that was really dramatic. But since then, I have recurring episodes that happen a couple, 3 times a year, and it's really hard. I keep myself emotionally balanced. I struggle with some anxiety and depression, and I keep myself balanced by running. And when I can't, I would say the mental game is harder than anything else. Just waiting and having to be patient. And I've had to go through that. And so every time I am outside and able to run, I am incredibly aware that it is a gift. Like I am incredibly the worst day being outside and moving my body is better than laying on my back in a bed with the sun shining outside and not being able to get up. And I that has been my life. That's really been my life since I was 18. I mean, almost 30 years at this point, and very much since I was for the last 20.
That's definitely a great way to look at it. That will definitely get you out of your bed and up running like
It's
this could be something else, something
it's
worse.
yeah.
When you say that you were kind of like running wasn't good for you, is that what you meant by that? Was it a particularly like the emotional part of it too, or
Yeah, so I mean, to be really blunt, I mean, this you're doing these episodes on women, strong women, but how running and being active gets you out there. Um, yeah, I mean, I by the time but in high school, I running became a problem. I was fast, and I was told that I was good, and I took it to an extreme. and I was overrunning and I was under eating and I ended up with an eating disorder. And this is not this is not unique. And when I got to college, I realized that I was in a much better place, but I was now surrounded by women on a running team who were struggling with these things, and it wasn't a place that I needed to be. I also will say that in high school, I never ran cross country. I ran track, but I played soccer in the fall. And I did that to really because I could not mentally do 3 seasons. It was not giving me joy at all. My senior year in high school, I played on a boys soccer team. I was, so I really did love soccer and would have continued doing that as well. So yeah, I got in a really bad place, and it's a struggle because a lot, and I think this is part of why I have never been drawn so much to traditional running groups or really the world of sort of running large scale running conversations. I mean, I just haven't, because the couple times in my life where I've dipped into that, especially in the social media space, it tends to feel to me that there's some unhealthy competition there, and there's a focus on parts of what running is that aren't why I do it
Yeah.
at this point in my life. And so finding like-minded folks who see running as a pathway to something more than simply times or external accomplishments is where I'm happy to be. But I have had to really back away from that, and I'm fine with that. But I think it surprises people at times because they expect that with how much I enjoy running, that I want to be part of groups of people who also enjoy running. And I've been very careful about what those groups are and who those people are, because it sometimes strikes me as I don't find it helpful for me. And at this point in my life, I want to do things that are helpful for me and healthy for me.
Right. And I feel like a lot of people like those groups, but there's a lot of people who can relate to you. And a lot of people who will listen to this and be inspired and be encouraged, like, hey, there's not just one path to continuing running. There's multiple different paths, and I can do a path that's right and healthy for me.
Yeah.
It's awesome. That's really
Yeah,
cool.
I will say just one other thing that may be of interest to some of your listeners, and I know you have an eclectic sort of broad group. I have I think I mentioned when I was emailing someone that I used to write for a blog that was actually about women in Catholicism, which is a side note, but I have a piece that I wrote there some years ago called On Tattoos and Running in the Woods. And it's really a meditation on my own, the way in which over my lifetime I was raised Catholic, and I have come to find being in outdoor spaces a place that it's my sanity. I always say it's my sanity, it's my sanctuary, and it's my salvation, right? And ended up in my 20s getting a tattoo that reflected that, and have spent a lot of my adult life, as I have bounced around the United States and bounced around the world due to family moves and job needs, found myself in all sorts of places all over this amazing world that we share, that are unfamiliar to me, but outdoor spaces, from Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire, on the west coast of Africa, to trails in outside of Luxembourg City in the middle of Europe, mountains in Greece, trying to trek up there, with a backpack on, sleeping in a refuge on the side of the mountain. I mean, all these places where the grandeur of what life offers is really on display, and just the amazingness of the people that I've met are on display. And so I have come to see my running as just also a meditation. For me, it's a meditative way to be, and to just be, and kind of soak up what's around. And that has been a powerful metaphor for me also, that I have shared with some folks over the years. But I always, sometimes people ask me about said tattoo that I have, and then I sort of get into this conversation about this weird connection between spirituality, faith, running, the natural world, and depending on who you're talking to, their eyes glaze over. Sometimes it's but sometimes it strikes a chord.
Right.
because it's eclectic and it doesn't fit in a box. And I think that's how I would mostly describe myself, and definitely in terms of running.
To your point a little bit about like the toxicity of like running, and some drew you kind of like more to like being outside. I ran in college too for Michigan State, and we kind of had this conversation actually last week about mental health and running, and kind of that atmosphere that is the negative side of running for us too. I, like you, like after um, kind of running more competitively, started going and doing trail running because I had never done that before, and I thought it was something that was like a challenge, but I didn't have to have all this other baggage around it. It wasn't a track, kind of a thing for me. So I can totally understand you on
You know
that
what?
one.
It's funny you should say that, because
Yeah.
the last few years I have tried a couple things that were just so outside of my comfort zone, particularly for that reason, because I didn't want to be burdened with having expectations. And so this triathlon that I did was one of them. Like, okay, I finished a half Ironman. Look at that. I didn't die. That was my entire goal at the beginning. Don't drown, don't fall off the bike, and then once you get to the running part, just have a good time. But then, a year and a half ago or so, I on a whim decided to sign up for a 50K trail run, mostly because when I was younger and growing up, where I was in New Hampshire was our sort of our house, and then miles and miles of logging trails. And part of how I got into running was to give me a legitimate escape from some real challenges in my household. If I said I was going out for a run, I could leave the house and I could go and be away. And where away was, there was running on these trails that, I mean, I'm sure now this was way pre cell phone and pre tracking, and who knows what might have happened, but it didn't. And it was just my sort of safe space. And yeah, but I hadn't done that in years. And I went out and ran this thing. And I mean, I was covered in mud by the end of it and spent a heck of a lot of time laughing. And turns out that I didn't do so badly, but I had zero expectations. I mean, the only goal was to go and try it and see what happened. And again, try to be okay with just being, and bringing joy to that experience. It was wonderful. So I hear you. Where I live here now, the trails that are closest to us are, frankly, is a lot of intense trail runner people. So I have not actually gone to those spaces. I tend to find little races in far off locations where it's really just me and whatever the space I'm in. Yeah.
Do you think that like the reason that you tried a bunch of different like events was because then like running kind of became this thing where it was like stressful, and then you kind of wanted to try something else?
It absolutely was. It absolutely was a way to try something else, to challenge myself in a new way, and to take some of the pressure off. I mean, that, and I know that about myself. The moment that there are no expectations is the moment that I can relax into it. And I put expectations on myself. I mean, in general, not just around running, but trying these things where I had zero expertise and were really dependent upon other people to either give me advice or tell me something, where I got to be sort of the newbie, the neophyte who didn't know what was going on and could just learn, was really, really liberating in a wonderful, wonderful way. And really, yeah, and reduced all kinds of stress. I'd like to live about 100 different lives, is what I'd like to do. And so I'd like to try about a million different things. Next up is I really want to go and do some training in biathlon. This is my newest adventure plan. I know I cross country ski, not amazingly, but I have for my whole life. And I've decided that biathlon might be a hoot, for no other reason that it seems really, really challenging, and I know nothing about shooting guns at targets. I suspect I would be horrible at it, but it sounds fun.
Yeah.
So, and I do wish that I had this kind of an outlook on these things earlier on in my life. I wish I had come to some of these realizations, um, but I do think that some of it just comes with age and life experience, and realizing, going through enough struggle and trauma to realize what's important and what's not.